Equal sign, equal sign, equal sign. Phase 6, final voiceover script, equal sign, equal sign, equal sign. Title, she showed up at my workshop in the rain and said she needed a husband by Friday. Trope, emergency contract marriage, #4, inheritance, property stewardship variant. Narrator, Marcus Hale, 35, black ex-Army logistics officer, custom lumber and woodworking operator, East Texas love interest. Claire Harmon, 27, white, Houston raised, granddaughter of neighboring timber property owner. Antagonist, Derek Harmon, Claire's uncle, Dallas corporate attorney, polished, calculated, uses race as leverage, setting East Texas, outside Beaumont. Timber country, red clay roads, cedar and pine. Word count, approximately 7,900 estimated runtime, approximately 61 minutes at 130. The night Claire Harmon knocked on my door, I had sawdust in my hair, a cold cup of coffee going flat on the workbench, and a board of eastern red cedar half sanded on the table. It was close to 11. Rain had been coming down since sundown, the kind of steady, unhurried East Texas rain that doesn't announce itself and doesn't stop, just settles in and stays. I had the workshop light on and the radio low. Simple. Mine? Quiet. Then somebody knocked. Not lightly, not politely. The kind of knocking that meant something had already gone wrong before the hand reached the door. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 35. I run a custom lumber and woodworking operation on 22 acres just east of Beaumont, Texas. Milling, drying, custom cuts, furniture work when the season allows. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Army as a logistics officer, which is a job that teaches you to move things from where they are to where they need to be with minimum wasted motion and no wasted words. I brought that back with me when I came home, built the workshop myself, built most of the house, too, over 3 years of early mornings and late Saturdays. After my mother passed 2 years ago, I kept the property going because stopping felt worse than working myself half into the ground, and the land was easier to understand than most things that had left me by then. I did not have a complicated personal life. I had work, a quiet house, and a fence line that ran along the back of the Harmon timber property for half a mile. I opened the door. Claire Harmon was standing on my porch in a yellow rain jacket that had failed completely, water streaming off the hood, hair pressed flat against her cheeks, boots soaked through. She was holding a manila folder pressed against her chest with both forearms, the way you hold something you cannot afford to lose. I had not seen her since her grandfather's funeral 6 weeks before. We were not close. I had known Ray Harmon Sr., her grandfather, for 12 years. He had the timber property half a mile down the road, and the kind of slow, principled character that makes you want to do right by a man just from being near him. When my mother died, he was the neighbor who showed up at the back door with food and did not make a production of it and did not stay longer than useful. He was the kind of man the world produces rarely. Claire had been at the funeral, composed and pale, the kind of composed that costs something to hold. Now she looked like she had walked a quarter-mile in the dark from the road. "Marcus," she said. I looked past her. No car. "You drive here?" She shook her head. "My uncle has my keys." That landed heavier than she probably meant it to. "Come inside." She stepped in and stood on the front room floor, leaving wet prints on the wood. I handed her a shop towel. She pressed it to her face and stood there holding it, looking at the folder. "Tell me what happened." I pointed at the kitchen table until she sat. I put the kettle on and spread room between us, because a person in that kind of distress needs space before they need words. She spread the papers across the table, damp at the corners, trust documents, a letter from an estate attorney, a county stamp. "Grandfather had a stewardship clause in his living trust," she said. "Nobody explained it to me until 2 days ago." "What kind of clause?" She flattened one page with the side of her hand. "The timber property and the mill can only pass to a direct descendant who demonstrates active stewardship and an established household within 90 days of his passing." The attorney said the cleanest single document proof of an established household is a marriage license. She looked at the page instead of me. "If I can't produce one before the deadline, my uncle Derek has the right as co-trustee to petition the court to force a liquidation sale." I looked at her. "When's the deadline?" "Friday." The word had no argument left in it. "Today is Monday." "Yes." I filled 2 mugs and set one in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at the steam. "Your Uncle Derek," I said. "He's been to the property?" She nodded. He arrived Sunday, new rental car, a suit with no wrinkles in it at 2 in the afternoon. He had 2 men with him by 4. One was writing on a clipboard. She paused. He wants to sell the mill and all 200 acres to a development group. He called it the responsible choice. I had met Derek Harmon twice. Once at a property line issue Ray had handled with patience and good paperwork. Once at the funeral, near the front, with the expression of a man already running arithmetic over something that wasn't his to count yet. He pushed one paper toward me, Claire said. She slid a page across the table. Grandfather wrote your name in a handwritten note attached to the trust, not in the legal document itself, a separate note. He said if the property ever needed a neighbor who understood timber and wouldn't look at old growth cedar and see dollar signs, you were the name. I did not touch the paper. I looked at her. What exactly are you asking me to do? She met my eyes, steady in the deliberate way that tells you it costs something to hold them there. I'm asking you to marry me. I know how that sounds. The kitchen went quiet enough to hear the rain hit the corner of the porch roof. I know it's an enormous thing to ask of someone I barely know, she said. I know it's unfair, but my uncle has pressure he can apply to most people in my life, and he knows it. You own your own property. You're not beholden to anyone in his orbit, and my grandfather trusted you, which means something to me, even if we've barely spoken. I thought about what I knew of this situation. A white woman at my table in rural East Texas asking a black man to put his name beside hers on a marriage license by Friday. I understood exactly how that would look to some people in this county. I understood what Derek Harmon would do with that picture the first chance he got. Are you using me? I asked. She did not look away. Yes, she said, but I'm telling you that directly. I'm not going to dress it up. You asked for the truth, and that's it. A polished answer would have closed the door. That one made me stay in the room. I stood and walked to the window over the yard. The workshop light was still on. I thought about Ray Harmon, 12 years of a neighbor who treated a handshake like a contract. A man who had sat with me at this same fence line after my mother's funeral and said nothing useful and nothing empty, and somehow that had been exactly what I needed. A man who had never once looked at me the way some men in this county looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I turned back. If I say yes, I said, there's one rule. She waited. We don't manage each other. You don't perform being fine when you're not. I don't pretend I'm doing you a pure favor when it's more complicated than that. Between us, at this table, in this house, we stay honest. To the outside world, we do what the paperwork requires, but in here, we stay clean. She held that, not nodding fast, actually sitting with it, okay? And if your uncle pulls something you haven't told me about, you tell me before it lands. I will. I looked at her, the wet folder, the damp hair, the way she was trying hard not to look as scared as she was. All right, I said, we'll go to the county clerk in the morning. Something shifted in her face, not relief, more like a person who has been carrying something for 3 days straight and has finally found somewhere to set it down, just for a moment. She slept in the guest room. I went back to the workshop and sat in front of the cedar board and did not sand it. I just looked at the grain. We drove to the county clerk at 8 the next morning. Claire wore a dark green dress with a brown jacket over it. I wore my cleanest shirt, which had a grease mark near the second button I only noticed under the fluorescent lights, and decided not to mention. The clerk looked at us the way county clerks look at people who arrive without a witness or a photographer. She looked at me first, then at Claire, then back at me. A half second longer than the task required. I had seen that look before. I let it pass. We signed where she directed. A judge with reading glasses on a cord said the required words. Claire's hand was cool and steady when I held it. Mine was calloused and smelled like cedar. When it was done, I said, now we see about keeping your grandfather's mill standing. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on my face for a half second longer than the moment required. I filed that away and did not open it. She moved into my house that afternoon. 2 bags, a laptop case, and a cardboard box of her grandfather's ledgers and papers she did not trust her uncle to leave unexamined. I gave her the second bedroom, my mother's old quilts on the bed, a dresser that stuck if you pulled the top drawer too hard. She stood in the doorway with her bag still in her hands. Bathrooms across the hall, I said. Closet door squeaks. I'll get to it. Thank you. You don't have to thank me every time I point at furniture. That almost got a smile. Close. The first few days were careful. Coffee at the same table. Neither of us sure where to look. She asked permission before using the kitchen. I kept telling her she lived there now and then, feeling strange each time I said it. At night, I heard the house settle, and once I heard her walk to the kitchen and stand there a while before going back to her room. I did not ask. By Wednesday, the county had noticed. That was the ecosystem here. A decision made at 8 in the morning could travel through the hardware store, the gas station, and the woman at the lumber supply by noon, arriving at each stop slightly different from what it had been when it left. At the lumber supply, Carl looked from Claire to me, then at me alone, for a beat longer than he had looked at Claire. The particular look some men in this county gave situations they had decided they did not entirely understand. I had known that look since I was in my 20s. It had a whole weather system behind it. "Heard you got married," he said. "We did," I said. "Fast." Timing didn't ask. He rang up the order. Outside, Claire stood by the truck with her arms folded. "He looked at you longer than me," she said. "Yes." "Does that happen a lot?" "More than it should." I loaded the last bag. "Your uncle is going to use it, whatever room we end up in with him. Men like Derek know exactly which instrument is sharpest for the particular wall they're trying to get through." She was quiet for a moment. "How do you deal with that?" "I stay very still and very clear, and I don't give it the reaction it wants." I got in the truck. Your grandfather helped me understand that, actually. He had a way of making a room do the adjusting without raising his voice. She looked at me. "He never talked about you the way I expected a neighbor to talk about a neighbor." "How did he talk about me?" She thought about that. "Like you were someone he had made a decision about a long time ago." I drove without answering that because I knew it was true and I did not want to make more of it than the moment could hold. Derek arrived at the timber property the next morning. Black rental car parked at the main gate with the precision of a man who arranges small things carefully. He was standing near the main workshop with two men, one in a gray blazer, one with a clipboard. When we pulled into the yard, Claire's posture changed in the seat beside me. Slightly, I noticed. "Keep moving," I said. She was out of the truck before I finished. Derek arranged his face into something that approximated warmth. He was tall, well-constructed, with the smooth authority of a man who had spent 20 years being the most prepared person in any given room. He looked at Claire first, then at me, and in that look at me was a calculation I recognized immediately. He was deciding how to use what he saw. "Claire," he said, "Marcus Hale. My father mentioned you often." "He was a good man," I said. "He was sentimental," Derek said, without edge, which made it land worse than edge would have. "I'm showing some interested parties the property. Standard due diligence." "It's not for sale," Claire said. Derek's expression did not shift. "Not today, but the deadline is Friday and we both know the clause. Let's not spend the week performing a disagreement we've already resolved." The man in the gray blazer looked at me, a brief, cataloging look, not subtle, the kind that decides what category of person you are and what weight to assign your presence. I held his gaze without commentary and let the look move on. I kept my voice at estimate register. "You can leave the property. These men don't have the co-owner's consent to be here." Derek looked at me with polished interest. "Is that right?" "That's right." The man with the clipboard looked at Derek. The gray blazer man looked at his shoes. Derek smiled the way men like Derek smile when they need a moment. "We'll be in touch," he said to Claire. He and his associates walked back to the rental car at a speed engineered to look unhurried. After the car reached the road, Claire let out a controlled breath. "He expected you to be quiet," she said. "I know." "Why weren't you?" "Because they were trespassing and I had standing to say so. I carried a length of pine inside. Well, that's different from stepping in front of you. Come on, let me show you how the mill works." Over the next week, I walked Claire through the operation the way Ray had once walked me through it, not lecturing, showing, and standing beside things long enough to let them teach. "Timber work isn't just about cutting," I told her one morning in the drying shed, running my hand along a beam of white oak that had been air drying for 14 months. "The wood tells you what it wants to do. See this grain here, how it curves near the center. If you cut against that curve, you get a board that looks right for a few weeks and then checks from the inside. Splits along a line you couldn't see until it was already too late." She leaned closer. "And if you work with it, then the board is stronger than the tree it came from. Same effort, different result. The difference is whether you listen first." She wrote that down in the small notebook she carried. I almost laughed. "I didn't mean that as a proverb," I said. "Good advice doesn't get less true for being written down." I let that sit. Earl Boudreaux had worked the Harmon Mill for 23 years. A large, quiet man with the particular stillness of someone who has earned his opinions the slow way. He tested everyone new to the mill. He had tested me the first time Ray brought me through years ago. It was not hostility. It was due diligence in its most honest form. The morning Earl asked Claire, while looking directly at me, when she wanted to reschedule the lumber delivery she had confirmed for the wrong week, I found an urgent problem with a cartwheel near the wall that required my full attention. The silence stretched out. Claire cleared her throat. Earl, the Tuesday delivery stays as scheduled. If the Friday order needs to shift, call the supplier and tell them we're moving to Monday the following week. I'll confirm in writing by end of day. Earl was still for a long moment, then, yes ma'am, and went back to work. Afterward, Claire appeared at my elbow with the expression of someone who had survived something she had not enjoyed. You just stood there. I examined a wheel. You knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, and you didn't say anything. And now next time he has a question, he'll call you first. That's different from me answering for you. That belongs to you. She opened her mouth, closed it. The corner of her mouth moved. That was the most uncomfortable 45 seconds of my week. It was. You still called it right. That night she made dinner without asking if the kitchen was available. Pasta, roasted tomatoes, something with herbs from a bag she had brought herself. She set a bowl in front of me and sat across the table like she had decided to stop asking permission to inhabit the space. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, I wanted to. She pushed her food around for a moment. He's going to say something about us, she said. Derek, in whatever room we end up in with him. Something about you and me. Specifically about you and me. Yes, I said, and you already know that. I've known it since you walked through my door. She looked at me, and you said yes anyway. Your grandfather put my name in that note, I said. That meant he thought about it. He thought about what it would look like and what it would cost, and he still wrote my name. That told me what I needed to know. She was quiet for a while. He never explained himself much. He just did things and let the doing speak. She looked at the table. I spent most of my life not being here. Parents divorced when I was 9. Mom moved us to Houston. I came summers sometimes, not enough. And now I'm trying to learn a place I should already know. That's not a character flaw, I said. That's just what happened. He never made me feel guilty for it, she said. Other people in town did, in that polite East Texas way where they don't quite say the thing they're actually saying. But Grandpa just welcomed me back like no time had passed. That was him, I said. He had a long memory for the good things about people and a short one for the rest. She smiled at her bowl, briefly, unguarded. Derek came back 10 days in, this time with 2 investors and the confidence of a man who had spent the intervening time calculating and liked the numbers he had arrived at. Earl called while we were at my place. We drove over. Claire was out before the truck stopped. Derek stood near the equipment shed with a gray blazer man and a new one. This one in a sport coat that had never hauled anything. The gray blazer man saw me get out of the truck and made a small, quiet decision I watched happen on his face. You need to leave, Claire said. Derek spread his hands. Claire, due diligence. That's all this is. It's my property and these men don't have my permission to be on it. Her voice was level. Tell them the tour is done. The sport coat man looked at Derek. Derek looked at me with the expression of a man who has identified his sharpest available instrument. Here's the thing, Claire, Derek said. He was still looking at me when he said it. Whatever arrangement you've made here, whatever Marcus told you it would accomplish, you should understand what it looks like from the outside. You're 27 years old. You went to your neighbor's house in the middle of the night, and 3 days later you married him. He let that sit. People in this county are going to say what they say about that, about you, about him. And those people include the investors, the attorneys, and the judge who's going to review this trust. He looked at Claire then. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm telling you what you're walking into. The yard was quiet. Earl was by the fence. The investors were watching. I felt the old fire stir, the one I had learned to bank instead of feed, because that was the move. Surface level concern wrapped around something sharper, a warning that was really a threat, delivered smoothly, deniably, with just enough truth in the wrapper to make it land. I took a breath and spoke at the same register I used for estimates. Flat, clear, done. The people in this county who are going to say what they're going to say, I said, have been saying it since before I was born, and they'll still be saying it after I'm gone. That's not news, and it's not leverage. I held Derek's gaze. What it is your tell. You just showed us exactly what you're planning to bring into that attorney's office. Thank you for that. Derek's arranged expression held, but something behind it tightened. Claire looked at him. Get off my property. She said it quietly. That made it better. The sport coat man looked at the equipment shed. The gray blazer man looked at Derek. Derek gathered his patience around himself like a coat and walked to the rental car with the men behind him. He stepped around a puddle near the gate without breaking stride. Not because he was in a hurry, because he did not want to get his shoes dirty. When the cars were gone, Earl walked over from the fence. He looked at Claire, not the way he had looked at her the first week. Good, he said, one word, and went back inside. Later in the mill office, Claire sat on the edge of a workbench and looked at her hands. He'll use that in the meeting, she said. He'll try. He's not wrong that people will talk. They're already talking, I said. People have been talking about us since Carl raised his eyebrows at the lumber supply. That's done. What we do now is put everything they can't argue with on the table. She looked at me. Are you? She stopped. Am I what? Are you okay with all of it? What he implied, what people are saying? I thought about that honestly. I've been okay with harder things than a county's opinion of who I married, I said. The question is whether you are. She held my gaze for a long moment. Yes, she said, and it sounded like a decision, not just an answer. On a quiet afternoon between the confrontations, I took her to the old original workshop, the first structure Ray had built on the property 40 years ago, small and hand-framed, with walls that had absorbed decades of cedar oil and effort. Claire stood in the doorway and breathed it in. I haven't been in here since I was 12, she said. I walked to the back shelf. 3 months ago, when I had come to help clear the workshop after the funeral, I had found it on the middle shelf wrapped in a square of burlap. I had known immediately that it had been placed there with intention. I had kept it because I did not know who to give it to and could not let it end up in a box. I held it out to her. A marking gauge, hand-carved from walnut, the kind of tool a timberman used to scribe a line before making a cut. For precision, for truth. It was old and smooth from years of use. On the handle, scratched in Ray Harmon's careful handwriting, sealed under a thin coat of varnish, were 2 words. True enough. Claire took it and turned it over. When she saw the inscription, her breath caught. His handwriting, she said. Yes, true enough. She ran her thumb over the letters. He said that in the workshop when I was little and I'd hold a board and ask if it was straight enough. He'd look at it and say, true enough. Like that was the standard. Not perfect, just true enough to build on. She looked up. How long have you had this? 3 months. I found it in the clearing. I didn't want it to get lost. She stood in the old workshop with the marking gauge in both hands, and for a moment she was fully unguarded. Not the careful composure she wore around Derek, not the focused attention she wore at the mill, just her. The 12-year-old who had stood in this room and learned what true enough meant. I went to check the hand tools on the far wall because she needed a moment and I was not going to make her share it before she was ready. On the drive home, she held the gauge in her lap. She touched it once on the county road when she thought I wasn't watching. I said nothing, but I knew what that gesture meant. The kiln fire started on a Tuesday night, 2 days before the court date. Old insulation on a wiring junction in the back of the kiln building, the kind of deferred maintenance that doesn't announce itself until it decides to. Earl called at 10:15. We were loading feed at my place. Claire listened to the call for 4 seconds and went pale. Kiln building, she said, moving before the call ended. By the time we arrived, 2 workers were at the building with extinguishers, and smoke was coming from the ventilation gap near the roofline. Gray and deliberate, not the black of something catastrophically wrong, but real and fast. I pulled the main breaker at the utility box. Claire was out of the truck. She did not ask me what to do. She walked to the workers at the building's edge, read the smoke, and said, "Don't go in, Earl. Secondary water line. Where's the key?" "Hook by the main door." "Get it, Marcus. Breakers pulled?" "Done." She looked at the ventilation gap. "Then we starve it. No door contact until the draw stops." We waited 38 minutes. When the smoke thinned and Earl confirmed the kiln had dropped below threshold, Claire took a flashlight and went in. She came out 2 minutes later with ash on her jacket sleeve, her notebook in hand, and the specific calm of someone who has been very afraid and chose to be useful instead. "Wiring junction at the back wall," she said. "I'll call the electrician at 7. Written report before the court date. I want documentation that we addressed it immediately." Earl looked at her, differently than he had ever looked at her before. "Good call on the waterline," he said, "cutting the draw before we opened the doors. That was right." "Thank you for getting here fast, Earl." On the drive back, she was quiet for a long time. "Worst night of my life so far," she said. "Building standing." I was terrified. I know. Is it always going to feel like that? First times do. The second time, you'll know what the smoke means and what to do about it. That's different. When we got back to the house, I put towels by the bathroom and made coffee at midnight because neither of us was sleeping. She came into the kitchen in an old flannel of mine that had been on the coat hook by the back door, sleeves hanging past both hands. She sat at the table, the marking gauge in front of her. "Do you still see me like that first night?" she asked. The woman who walked through the rain with a folder she was trying to protect with her own body. I looked at her across the table. The woman with the folder was still part of who she was, the way anything true about a person doesn't stop being true. But now there was more. The woman who had stood in the yard and told Derek to leave. The woman who had learned to call suppliers without rehearsing first. The woman who had stood in a smoky doorway and made the right calls in the right order. "No," I said, "I don't." She held my gaze. The house was quiet. The coffee was ready, and neither of us moved toward it. What happened between us that night was not part of any arrangement. It did not belong to Derek or the county attorney or any room we would have to stand in together to prove something. It was quiet and honest and entirely ours. In the morning, she was still at the table when I came in at 6, hands wrapped around a mug, the marking gauge beside it. For the first time since I had signed my name at the county clerk's office, I was afraid of what would happen when the court date was over, because by then I already knew it was not just the mill I wanted to see stay standing. The court date was Thursday morning. Derek arrived at Mr. Harmon's estate office, above the bank on Clement Street, narrow stairs, old carpet, in a charcoal suit that fit the way money fits a person who has never had to think about it. He sat with one ankle crossed over his knee, and the expression of a man waiting for a formality to confirm an outcome he had already written. Claire stood beside me in the hallway, holding a folder twice as thick as the one she had brought to my workshop 3 weeks before. "Ready?" I asked. "No," she said. She breathed and set her shoulders. "Let's go in anyway." Mr. Harmon was Ray's attorney for 20 years. He moved papers the way surgeons move instruments, with the understanding that everything in its right position matters. He put on his glasses and looked at both parties with level, unhurried attention. Derek went first. Structured, measured, precise. The word concern delivered 4 times like a tool. His argument: haste, financial pressure, no prior relationship. Claire had no operational background. The stewardship clause required demonstration, not performance. And then, calmly, as if it were simply one more observable fact in a long list of facts, he noted that the marriage itself presented reputational complications for the estate, that an arrangement entered under these specific circumstances between parties of this specific profile would face questions that a straightforward sale wouldn't. He said it with the smooth neutrality of someone who had practiced removing the fingerprints from a sharp thing. He sat back. Mr. Harmon looked at Claire. "Would you like to respond?" She opened the folder. She laid out the invoices. Equipment maintenance, all current, all signed. Timber delivery schedules for the next quarter, renegotiated at better terms. Worker schedules, names, hours, duties. A repair order for the kiln wiring, initiated the morning after the incident, with the electrician's written confirmation attached. A letter from Earl Boudreau, 23 years at the mill. The letter said in Earl's careful handwriting that Claire Harmon had demonstrated sound operational judgment and had his full professional confidence. Letters from 2 neighboring property owners confirming ongoing business and their stated intention to continue under her management. Derek watched each page go down. His arranged expression held, but it was working harder with each page. "Rehearsed," he said. Claire addressed Mr. Harmon. "I won't tell you I know everything about running a timber operation. I don't, and I'd be lying if I said otherwise, but the mill is operating. The workers are paid. The equipment is maintained. A crisis was handled correctly and documented." She paused. "My grandfather built this property over 40 years. He built it because he understood that land produces what you put into it. That walking away from something because someone has decided its resale value is higher than its working value is not responsibility. It's just easier." She looked at Derek then, not with anger, with the clear, level look of someone who has stopped being afraid of the thing she's looking at. "You dressed this up as concern from the beginning. Concern for the property. Concern for me. Concern about how things look. She set her hands flat on the folder. But you brought investors through before the deadline was up. You tried to use the way this marriage looks to a certain kind of person as a pressure point in an attorney's office. That's not concern, that's strategy. And it tells me everything I need to know about what you would have done with this land. Derek opened his mouth. Before he could speak, Claire reached into her bag and placed something on the table. The marking gauge, walnut, worn smooth, Ray Harmon's handwriting on the handle. She opened her grandfather's work journal to the last entry, the one she had found 2 nights ago at the kitchen table, going through the box she had carried from the mill. She had not shown it to me. She had just carried it in the folder and waited for the right moment. She read it aloud. Marcus Hale knows what this land is for. So does Claire, even if she hasn't figured that out about herself yet. I hope they figure it out together. That's about all I have to say. The room was still. Derek stared at the journal, at the marking gauge, at his father's handwriting and the voice of a man who had been gone for 6 weeks and was still in this room, saying the thing that needed to be said. Something moved behind Derek's careful expression. Not remorse, not surrender, but recognition. The recognition that the room had changed without his permission and that he had not brought enough to change it back. Mr. Harmon reviewed the documents for 4 deliberate minutes. He removed his glasses. The marriage license satisfies the stated household condition. The documentation provided demonstrates active operational stewardship within the required time frame. The petition for liquidation is denied. The Harmon timber property and mill will pass to Claire Harmon under the terms of the trust. Nobody moved. Derek stood. His chair moved on the carpet. He looked at Claire with the expression of a man who has lost something he considered his and has already decided someone will eventually pay for it. You'll regret this. Maybe, she said, but it'll be my regret, and my mill. He waited for her to soften. She did not. He took his coat and left without looking at me. That was its own kind of acknowledgement. Through the window, I watched him reach the sidewalk below, cross to the rental car, step carefully around a puddle so as not to get his shoes wet, and drive away without looking back. Outside, the morning moved around us the way mornings do in small towns. The pharmacy, a woman with a paper bag, a delivery truck somewhere down the block, ordinary life happening in total indifference to what had just been settled upstairs. Claire stood by the passenger door of my truck and looked at the marking gauge in her palm. "It's over," she said. "It is." She turned it twice. "The clause is satisfied. The deadline passed. You held up everything you agreed to." She looked at me. "If you want out of the rest of it, I won't hold you to a paper that was only ever supposed to solve one specific problem." The street noise sat between us. A truck went past. Somewhere down the block, a door opened and closed. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said what was true. 8 years in the Army taught me one thing above everything else. The most important decision in any operation is not where you move. It is knowing where home base is, not where you started, not the coordinates on the original order, the place you orient everything else around, the place you return to. I had been moving things from one place to another my whole life. Material, equipment, people, effort. I was good at it. I had built a career and a workshop and a house out of knowing how to get things where they needed to go. What I had not accounted for, in any plan I had ever made for myself, was the possibility that I was the thing that needed moving, and that it had already happened. 3 weeks ago in the rain, at my front door. Claire was still watching me. I did not explain all of that. A man like me does not explain all of that standing on a sidewalk on a Thursday morning. I just reached out and took her hand. She held it the way you hold something you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. We drove back without much talking. When we reached the fence line between my property and the Harmon land, the half-mile line neither of us had built and both of us had stood at in different weathers and different years, Claire stepped out and stood beside me. The afternoon sun came through the pine in long, flat angles, laying gold across the red clay. She held the marking gauge flat in her palm, Ray Harmon's handwriting on the handle, 2 words worn smooth from 40 years of use. True enough. And for the first time since I came home from the Army with a discharge paper and a plan for a workshop and no clear idea what I was building it toward, I understood that the operation was complete. I had moved everything exactly where it needed to go. What would you have done if a woman you barely knew showed up at your door in the middle of the night and asked you to marry her to save the only thing her family had left? And have you ever spent years moving forward without realizing you were actually moving towards something? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Equal sign, equal sign, equal sign. End of script, equal sign, equal sign, equal sign. Script stats. Word count, approximately 7,800. Runtime, approximately 60 minutes at 130 WPM. Narrator, Marcus Hale, 35, black, ex-Army, custom lumber operator, East Texas, love interest. Claire Harmon, 27, white, Houston raised. Antagonist, Derek Harmon. Reputational risk as weapon, polished institutional racism. HEA object. Hand-carved walnut marking gauge, true enough. Grandfather Ray's handwriting. Climax device, grandfather's last journal entry read aloud. I hope they figure it out together. Ending, Army, logistics metaphor. I was the thing that needed moving. Juan Ton Kak Kautruk Doi Thu. Female agency moments, Earl delivery scene, yard confrontation, kiln fire command, attorney meeting, interracial dimension, woven throughout, Carl at lumber supply, Derek's reputational complications tactic, Marcus's response to the sport coat man. Physical anchors, marking gauge, X5, shop towel, opening, flannel sleeves over hands. Act 6, ash on jacket sleeve. Act 5, rain-soaked folder, opening plus attorney scene callback. Script completed, all 6 phases finished, ready for recording. Voiceover workflow. 1. Copy clean prose from the night Claire Harmon knocked to I'll see you in the next video. 2. Paste directly into 11 Labs. OpenAI TTS3. Voice, male narrator, mid-30s, warm but restrained, steady. Suggest 11 Labs Marcus or Daniel. 4. Generate no editing needed.